Okay, so welcome to 1617 lesson 3. We're going to look today at how data is displayed. So you've already learned about the different types of data, how to collect it, and now we're going to look at how to display it. So data is frequently displayed in pictorial or visual ways. So we have bar graphs and histograms, pie charts, pictographs, and also line graphs. The most common ones that are used for graphing statistics are the histograms, pie charts, and bar graphs. So these are the ones that we're going to focus on. Now, a bar graph is used when the data collected is discrete or something that's specifically counted and there's no in between. So for example, here we see what kind of pets do you own, some survey, and we can clearly see that 4 people said that they had rabbits, 8 people said that they had dogs, 11 people said they had cats, etc. So this is considered discrete data and we use bars to display this. And at the bottom you can see different categories. This is different than a histogram. So a histogram we use when the data is continuous or wants to be displayed in some sort of intervals. So here we have an example of a histogram for the 2012 regular season MLB and talking about how many home runs were hit. If we look at the x-axis, it looks very different than the bar graph. So here we do not have categories, but we have intervals or ranges where we can show how many people hit between 0 and 5 home runs, how many people hit between 5 and 10, and so on. So we get this kind of continuous data in the form of a histogram where each category runs right into the next. Okay, so we call this continuous data, and this is a histogram. Here's the main difference. Again, bar graph, individual categories, no in-between data. And a histogram, we have continuous numbers, and there are no gaps between the bars. So it does look significantly different. When we collect data, usually we have a wide range of numbers, and to present it, we frequently use a histogram. So we're going to focus on creating a histogram. First, you're going to need to make a frequency table to tally up the categories, and we'll look at that in a second in an example. But to keep in mind when you are creating a histogram is that all of your intervals should be the same width, which is something you should be used to doing when you create a graph, right? You count by 5, 10, 15, 20, and you don't jump all over the place. When we're picking our intervals, we want to display between 5 and 20 intervals. We don't want 100 little bars on our graph. We want between 5 and 20 bars. So we'll pick ranges depending on the values. And again, that's specific to the example. There should be no gaps between your intervals. And if a value falls on the boundary of an interval, so say the interval is from 0 to 5 and then 5 to 10, if 5 was the number that came up, you would actually group it in the higher category. So in the 5 to 10 category. You wouldn't count it twice, but it would also, or it was always go into the higher category. So here I just grabbed some data, which specifically are period 5 report card marks as of May. And you can see that there are a number of students in the class, and I want to display their data in the form of a histogram. Okay, it's continuous data, and I want to display it using bars on a histogram. First thing I need to do is I need to decide on what interval am I going to group these marks into. When I look at my data, I can see that the lowest mark in the class is 56 and the highest mark is 96. So there's a 40 mark range within the class, and I would like to display that. So I don't need to start counting till about 55 because nobody has a mark lower than 55. And then I need to decide, do I want to count by 5s? Do I want to count by 10s? Do I want to count by 20s? If I count by 5s, I end up with 8 intervals, which is good. We want to have between 5 and 20 intervals. So 8 would be a good number. So we're going to count by 5s. So I've set up my intervals here to count by 5. So starting at 55, 55 to 60, 60 to 65, 65 to 70, and so on. Now I have to tally up how many students fall within each of these intervals. So the easiest way is to just do it one at a time. So 91, that student falls in the 90 to 95 range. 80, well, that's right on a interval, and again we said if it falls on an interval, put it on the higher one. So 80 would go with 80 to 85. 68 is between 65 and 70. 85 again into the higher category. 95 higher category, and so on. So once you've done all the tallies, you can fill in the frequency. So the frequency is just the numeric value of each, how many fall into each category. So from 50 to 55 to 60, I have one person. I have two in this category, 1, 3, none, 5, 3, 3, and 3. With this information, now I can create my histogram. So I'm going to start a graph down here. So I have my intervals at the bottom. Again, they should match the intervals you had in your chart. And now I need to tally up how many students are in each interval. Well, the highest number I had was 5, so I only needed to count up to here to 5. And then you just start creating your bars. So I have one student that falls in the first interval, 2 in the second. So I can go down to my graph. So I have one student in this first interval, and then I have 2 students in the next, and then 1, and then 3, 1, and then 3, and then 0 falling in the 75 to 80 range, 80 to 85, 5, and then I have 3 in each of the last categories. Obviously, yours will be a little bit neater because you'll be using graph paper. So here we go. We have created the histogram using the given data, and now I can answer questions about it. How is it distributed? What is the most common? What is the least common, etc. The last type of graph is a circle graph or a pie chart, and usually this is used when we want to display things in a more visual way and we want to break it into its parts. So we can clearly see very quickly from this graph, even if the numbers weren't on here, that the majority of people's favorite pizza topping is pepperoni, and then cheese, and so on and so on. So to create one of these, first you have to figure out what percent each category is, and then do some algebra and figure out, out of the 360 degrees in a circle, how much would each of these be, and then use a protractor. We are not going to focus on this type of graph in terms of creating it. You should be able to read one and answer questions, but we're not going to focus on drawing one. So just to recap, we have bar grams, histograms, and circle graphs as our main types of displaying statistical data. Bar graphs are used when it's discrete categorical data and you do include a space between the bars. The histogram is the one that we did at the example of where we had continuous interval data and we did not put any spaces between our bars. And the circle graph is usually used to show something that is broken up into parts. Thanks.